If you drive north of Vancouver, across the Lions Gate Bridge, through the city of North Vancouver, beyond Horseshoe Bay, you'll come to the scenic sea-to-sky highway, which runs along the eastern shores of Howe Sound. At the head of this enchanting fjord, where the Squamish River drains into the sea, lies the quaint town of Squamish, British Columbia, a popular stopping place for skiers and snowboarders on their way to the white slopes of Whistler. This mountain town is a popular recreational destination in its own right, being home to an imposing granite cliff known as the Stawamus Chief, renowned by rock climbers the world over, and boasting what are regarded as some of the best mountain bike trails in the world. For millennia, the head of Howe Sound has served as the hub of the Squamish Nation, a division of the Central Coast Salish, whose ancestral territory encompasses Howe Sound, the watershed of the Squamish River, and much of the Burrard Inlet. Like other Coast Salish nations, these people have traditional stories about mysterious wild men that lurked in the surrounding rainforest, old campfire tales that appear to have been affirmed by a handful of chilling encounters made throughout the 20th century. In this piece, we will uncover classic Sasquatch stories from Squamish. The oldest ethnographic work on the traditional tales of the Squamish appears in the 1895 German-language book, Indian Myths and Legends from the Northwest Coast of America, written by German-American anthropologist Franz Boas, whom some call the father of American anthropology. Under a chapter entitled Legends of the Squamish, Boas included a story set at the southern end of Lillooet Lake, in the traditional domain of an interior Salish people called the Lillooet. In this story, a newly bereaved widower set out into the wilderness on a mythical quest, hoping to retrieve the soul of his wife from the land of the dead. This ultimately fruitless errand required him to sneak past several spiritually powerful creatures, aided by a magic substance which he obtained from a pelican. These preternatural guardians included the double-headed serpent, which Boaz's informants called the Slalakum Atlke, a mysterious bird called the Tletska Wool, and a giant called Saskats, who devoured any humans who tried to pass his lair. In a footnote in their 2006 translation of Boaz's book, Canadian ethnographers Randy Bouchard and Dorothy Kennedy identified this creature as the Sasquatch of upriver Hulkamalum tradition. Another of Boaz's stories is a Squamish variation of the Basket Ogress legend, common to folk traditions throughout the Pacific Northwest. A nearly identical story appears in English-Canadian ethnologist Charles Hilltout's 1900 treatise on the Squamish. Squamish elder Louis Miranda told another iteration of this tale to Dutch linguist Art H. Cowpers, who included it in his 1967 book on the Squamish language. Miranda's story was reproduced in the 2008 anthology Salish Myths and Legends. One day, the story goes, a group of children of various ages were swimming and playing in some shallow water on the beach. The eldest of these children was a woodcarver named Tetkatsin, who sat facing the water, with his back to the forest, whittling a piece of wood. While the children were engrossed with their amusement, a huge old ogress called Kulkaleel emerged from the woods and crept towards them, carrying a large basket on her back. In one version of the story, this basket was made from woven snakes. Silent and stealthy, she snuck up behind Tetkatsin, scooped him up in her huge arms, and tossed him into her basket. In the version of the story recorded by Cowpers, Kulkaleel found the children alone in a Squamish house, their parents having left to fish and forage. After capturing Tetkatsin, the ogress snatched the rest of the children one by one and threw them into the pack with the carver, luring some of the children with strips of cedar bark, which she pretended were pieces of dried salmon. When the last of the children were stowed away, Kulkaleel set off through the woods for her lair. Unbeknownst to his kidnapper, Tetkatsin still carried the knife with which he had been carving. While the ogress was trudging up the forest trail, he used his blade to slice a hole in the bottom of the basket, out of which he helped the littlest children to slip. Each time a child fell from the basket and hit the forest floor with a thud, the ogress stopped and asked what the noise was. Each time, the carver convinced her that the thudding was simply the sound of her own heels hitting the ground. In time, Kulkaleel reached her lair and dumped the remaining children from her basket. After building a huge fire, on which she placed a number of large stones, she set about preparing a quantity of tar, with which she planned to glue the children's eyes shut. Correctly ascertaining her intention, Tetkatsin urged the other children to screw their eyes shut as tightly as they could when the tar was applied, so that as little as possible would stick to their eyelids and lashes. Some of those who followed his directions were afterwards able to open their eyes a crack, while the rest were rendered temporarily blind. When she was convinced she had sealed the eyes of the children, the ogress painted herself and began to dance around her fire in preparation for her impending meal. Tetkatsin complimented Kalkaleel, whom he endearingly referred to as his grandmother, on her dancing ability, and urged her to caper a little closer to the children. The ogress acquiesced. When she was within arm's length, the carver pushed the monster onto the fire, setting her hair ablaze. Shrieking, the ogress demanded that the carver help her out of the flames. Tetkatsin grabbed a stick and extended them towards the ogress, as if beseeching her to grab hold of it. Instead of pulling the monster from the fire, however, he used the stick to prevent her from escaping the flames, protesting all the while that she was too heavy to haul out. While Tetkatsin was struggling to keep the ogress on the pyre, the rest of the children found some grease nearby and used it to wash the tar from their eyes. When they were able to see clearly again, they helped the carver pile wood onto the fire, and soon the ogress was reduced to ashes, which transformed into snowbirds as they scattered in the wind. In some versions of the story, the snowbirds are lice that flew from the ogress's burning hair. Free at last, Tetkatsin took the children back home to their parents, who had given them up for dead. Major J.S. Matthews, the first archivist of the city of Vancouver, included a note on the Squamish belief in the Basket Ogress in the 1935 issue of his publication, Early Vancouver. Matthews received this information from Captain Charles Cates Jr., a tugboat captain, and the son of a prominent pioneer of what would become North Vancouver, who would go on to serve on several anthropological and historical committees, be made an honorary Squamish Chief, and serve as the mayor of North Vancouver. According to Matthews, Deeks Creek, a waterway which empties into the eastern end of Howe Sound, just north of Lions Bay, was said to have once been home to an ogress who ate children, who carried her prisoners off in a basket woven from snakeskins. Then one day, when she had a little boy in her basket, Cates told Matthews, the sun got hot, and the snakeskins stretched, and the little boy in it squeezed out, and ran home and told the people. Cates' tale was reiterated by Squamish Chief August Jack Catsalano, who told Matthews that the Squamish regarded Deeks Creek as an evil place that was to be avoided. The Basket Ogress is not the only wild person that appears in traditional Squamish tales. In his 1900 book, Hilltout included an old campfire story which purports to explain the origin of forest dwellers called Smeledl, or wild people. A succinct introduction to these legendary beings appears in the abstract of a 2007 paper written by Squamish archaeologist Dr. Rudy Reimer Yumpks. The native peoples who inhabit the Pacific Northwest coast possess oral traditions concerning cryptozoology, including the wild people, also known as Sasquatch or Bigfoot, Reimer wrote. For the Squamish Nation, these are wild people, or Smeledl. Squamish historical accounts indicate that these wild people and humans are, or once were, related. This common ancestry indicates long-standing cohabitation within Squamish territory. The wild people origin story related by Hilltout seems to be a Squamish variation of a werewolf legend shared by the neighboring Stalo and the northerly and unrelated Dogrib, the canine version of which Hilltout interestingly included later in his book. In this tale, the maiden daughter of a Squamish chief was regularly visited in the night by a mysterious male stranger who took pains to conceal his identity in the darkness. After several of these nocturnal visitations, the girl found herself pregnant, to her father's mortification. Desperate to learn the identity of this mysterious intruder, the girl put paint on her hands before she went to sleep, and smeared it on the mystery man's back when he came to her that night. The following morning, the girl discovered her paint on the back of her father's slave, who routinely slept at the foot of her bed every night. When the chief learned that his slave had impregnated his daughter, he took the two of them into his canoe and paddled downriver until he reached a canyon with sheer walls. In his 2007 paper, Reimer Yumpks indirectly identified this chasm as a section of Mill Creek, which drains into Howe Sound about 7 kilometers southwest of Squamish, running by the bygone wood fiber pulp mill. There, on a shelf of rock, the chief left the lovers to die. Against all odds, the star-struck couple managed to scale the cliff on which they had been abandoned and wandered into the forest above. After days of weary traveling through the mountains, they came to an inland lake where they decided to settle. Over the years, the princess and the slave raised a large family on the shores of the wooded lake. Their children intermarried, spawning a large tribe of tall men who lived without tools and clad themselves in undressed furs, yet maintained use of the Squamish language. By dint of their primitive lifestyles, these people became great hunters and developed senses as keen as wild animals. The Squamish who encountered these savages in the wilderness referred to them as the Wild People. Kuipers reproduced this story in his 1967 Linguiography and added 2 more tales of encounters with wild people, related by his Squamish informant, Elder Louis Miranda. One of the tales was the account of Miranda's great-great-uncle, who hailed from the southwesterly seaside community of Sechelt, which lies on British Columbia's Sunshine Coast. When his wife died, the man fell into a deep depression, which could only be mitigated by daytime trips into the wilderness. In the style of Squamish medicine men and vision questers, the uncle made a habit of washing himself frequently in cold spring water during his wilderness escapades, which the Squamish believed purified the spirit. Each of his successive adventures brought him ever deeper into the wilderness. He used to come down when darkness fell, Miranda said, but finally it got so that he would camp out in the mountains and stay away for long periods. One day, the uncle's wanderings carried him to an alpine lake. Night had already fallen by the time he reached this body of water, and so he camped on the lakeshore. The following morning, he awoke to see the telltale plume of campfire smoke rising from the opposite shore. Although he couldn't make out any human figures on the other side of the lake, he spotted a herd of mountain goats fleeing for their lives, as if pursued by a predator. This was accompanied by the distant sound of what he first took to be the barking of dogs. Assuming that the person on the opposite shore was a native hunter, the uncle made his way around the lake, determined to greet his mysterious neighbor. When he came close, Miranda said, what he had kept for dogs came at him, and it turned out to be wolves. Presently, their master appeared, a giant, who quieted his pack. The uncle boldly approached the huge hunter, who, as if to impress an idea of his strength upon the newcomer, drew his massive bow and shot an arrow clean through a nearby tree. Not to be outdone, the uncle selected a rotten stump, drew his own bow, and shot an arrow through the decayed wood. Apparently pleased with this display, the giant greeted the uncle and identified himself as one of the Wild People. The giant then invited the uncle to accompany him to his home in the mountains, which offer the hunter accepted. The giant's village proved to be a populous community, whose inhabitants treated their guests with all courtesy. When the uncle announced his intention to return to his own home, the giants gifted him an enormous bundle of mountain goat skins, which was far too heavy for him to carry. His giant friend then hauled the bundle to the lake on which the 2 of them had met, and laid it by the shore, telling the uncle that he would go no further. For weeks, the uncle made regular trips from the alpine lake to Sechelt, carrying manageable quantities of mountain goat skins back with him on every journey. His friends repeatedly inquired into the source of his treasure, but the uncle never told them where the skins came from. On his deathbed at last, Miranda concluded, he told about the tribe he had seen up in the mountains. After his death, people would go and look for the tribe he had told about, but no one discovered them, and afterwards they stopped looking for them. Later in his book, Kuipers included an English translation of another wild man story told to him by a Squamish informant. According to this tale, a man from the mouth of the Squamish River decided to go on a hunting trip. He paddled southwest to the mouth of Mill Creek and headed up into the mountains. When night fell, he made camp, kindled a fire, and lay down to sleep. That night, long after the fire had died out, the man was awakened by the sound of someone climbing up the slope behind him. His heart pounding in his throat, the hunter grabbed his rifle and peered into the darkness, his surroundings faintly illuminated by the light of the moon. Soon, a hulking man-like figure climbed up over the crest and stared at the prone hunter, who kept still as stone. The figure backed up, as if reluctant to be seen, and melted into the darkness. Moments later, the same mysterious visitor emerged from the gloom and slunk stealthily towards the hunter in a predatory manner. Terrified, The hunter leveled his rifle at the intruder and shot it in the belly, sending it tumbling backwards over the precipice with a shriek. For some time, the hunter could hear the wounded figure groaning from the spot at which its body came to rest. Then the groaning ceased, and all was quiet again. The hunter wasted no time in packing his gear, descending the mountain, and canoeing back to his village. In the ensuing days, he made inquiries at all the neighboring reserves, asking whether any natives had failed to return from their hunting trips recently, but could find no such reports. After a considerable time had passed, the informant said in Squamish, he went back to have a look at the spot where he had camped. Then he went down to what he judged to be the place from where the apparition had come. He reached the bottom and saw a skeleton there. It was indeed a human being, except that the bones were of very large dimensions. The shin bone reached up to his hip when he measured it. It must have been an enormous man. No mere smoky tales bandied about Squamish longhouses. Reports of wildman encounters in the Howe Sound area were made regularly throughout the 20th century. In his 1978 book, Sasquatch: The Apes Among Us, Canadian Bigfoot researcher John Willison Green briefly alluded to a story told to him and his fellow researcher Rene de Hinden by the aforementioned Captain Charles Cates Jr., who served at the time as the mayor of North Vancouver. Charles Cates had grown up as a neighbor of the Indians on a North Vancouver reserve, Green wrote. He told us that a friend of his had been one of a group of people camped on Anvil Island in Howe Sound when a Sasquatch put its head into their tent at night. Anvil Island, incidentally, lies a mere 3.5 kilometers west of the mouth of Deeks Creek, which the Squamish said was once the domain of a Basket Ogress. In 1957, 3 years prior to his death, Cates wrote Green a brief letter stating that the Squamish name for the wild man sounded somewhat like Smile-Lick. Their stories always seem to have the same description as to their physical appearance, he wrote. And also, the Indians did not use the existence of these creatures to tell any fantastic tales about them. They merely refer to them by name, adding that they are quite shy and will do no harm, the reference always being quite casual. Also, I knew 2 or 3 old men who said that in their youth they had seen the creatures in various parts of the coast, as apparently they were quite plentiful years ago. In his 1973 book, The Sasquatch File, John Green alluded to the mysterious tracks of a 2-legged animal discovered by a Vancouver man north of Squamish in the winter of 1964. According to Rene de Hinden, who interviewed the witness, the man claimed that the tracks were 18 inches long. Green made brief mention of a similar wildman sign discovered in March 1969 in his 1970 book, Year of the Sasquatch, and his 1973 book, On the Track of Sasquatch. A man checking his summer cabin 6,000 feet up a mountain near Squamish, BC, he wrote, found bipedal tracks taking 6-foot strides in deep snow. The feet were bare and had 5 toes. In the Sasquatch File, Green placed these tracks at a tiny body of water called Lewis Lake, located in the Squamish-Chicamus Divide mountain range between the Chicamus and Squamish rivers, just west of the Chicamus Canyon climbing site. The next month, on April 6, 1969, trailblazers scouting a potential ski route in the Callahan Valley west of Whistler discovered a 3rd pair of 5-toed human-like tracks in the snow, which stretched across the slope of Powder Mountain for several miles. The footprints measured 14 inches in length, but indicated a relatively short stride length of between 30 and 34 inches. The prints were first discovered by Ted Osborne, one of the project leaders, and examined thoroughly by Osborne's partner, Jack Wilson of North Vancouver. Wilson told Green and de Hinden that whatever made the tracks appeared to stop on occasion to strip spruce buds off the trees, presumably to eat them. As Green put it in Year of the Sasquatch, every time the tracks passed one of the scattered spruce trees, all the new buds are stripped off the tree to a height of 5 or 6 feet on the side of the tracks passed, and husks from spruce buds are in the bottoms of all the tracks. 2 years later, in May 1971, a man named G. Conway, who hailed from the city of Delta, BC, south of Richmond, wrote a letter to John Green in which he claimed to have found huge human-like tracks in a sandbar in the Squamish Valley, more than 30 miles up a logging road. They were 14 inches long, Green wrote, and looked like the photos of Sasquatch tracks, but were fairly old. In his various books, Green included a transcript of an interview he conducted in January 1970 of a highway maintenance foreman who claimed to have spotted an unusual animal several days earlier, while driving on the BC Highway 99, about 18 miles north of Squamish. The encounter took place on January 7th, 1970, at about 2:30 in the afternoon. I came around a slight curve in the road, the foreman told Green, and there was this animal on all fours facing away from me. A large, hairy animal. I thought at first it was a bear. As I drew closer, it turned sideways, and it got up on its hind legs and ran across the road in an upright position. I knew then it was definitely not a bear. It was a human-like animal, but a monkey-type appearance. The foreman told Green that the creature stood at least 7 feet tall, had a sturdy build, appeared to weigh about 250 pounds, and possessed human-like proportions, with the exception of an imperceptible neck and a very prominent stomach. Its body was covered with shaggy, 4-inch-long reddish-brown fur, while its head bore dark brown hair that was much shorter than the hair on its body. Its face was flat and apparently hairless, and lighter in color than the hair on the head and body. The creature looked directly at the foreman as it strode across the road, its face bearing an expression of either terror or rage, which startled the construction worker. Intriguingly, the witness noted that the creature clutched a 10-inch-long fish in a single hairy fist. Its hand swung along when it was running across the road, the foreman elaborated, and when it was climbing the bank, it did use its left hand a couple of times. It bent slightly forward like a man would do, and assisted itself or balanced itself up the incline with its left hand, still holding the fish with its right hand. Irish-American Sasquatch researcher Peter Byrne investigated this very same sighting, and published his findings in his 1973 book, The Search for Bigfoot, and his 2015 book, The Hunt for Bigfoot. Several of the details he unearthed differ considerably from Green's findings. While Green neglected to identify the highway maintenance foreman, refraining in his earlier books from even naming the location of his sighting, in accordance with the man's desire for anonymity, Byrne identified the witness as William Taylor, who hailed from the northeasterly town of Pemberton. Byrne wrote that Taylor's sighting took place on a bitterly cold December afternoon in 1971, nearly 2 years after Green's January 7, 1970 date. And while Green claimed the sighting took place about 18 miles north of Squamish, which would place it between the Squamish Canyon picnic site and Lucille Lake, Byrne claimed that it occurred about 6 miles southwest of Alta Lake, just before the Squamish River waterfalls, on a hairpin turn blasted through the mountains. Both of these vague locations conflict with Byrne's more specific placement, on a bend in the road adjacent to a CPR bridge over the Squamish River, which lies just south of the Squamish Canyon picnic site. Incidentally, this location lies less than 5 kilometers northeast of Lewis Lake, where a cabin owner found barefoot human-like tracks in the snow the previous year. Byrne interviewed Taylor in his Pemberton home, and found him to be an intelligent, rational man of obvious credibility. He secretly interviewed several of the man's friends and co-workers, as well as the local police, who made similar pronouncements. His first impression was that it was a bear, Byrne wrote to the subject of Taylor's encounter, for it was down on all fours, close to the bank that edged the road on the left, or the west side of it. Then it stood upright, and as he drew his truck to a sudden halt, it walked quickly across the road to the opposite bank. It climbed this bank, watching him as it did so. Then it went over the top of the bank, which is about 20 feet high at this place, and, walking upright, disappeared. As he had during his interview with Green, Taylor described the creature he saw as having a massive build and a large protruding stomach, and claimed that the entirety of his body, with the exception of its face, was covered with 4-inch-long dark reddish-brown fur. This time, however, he estimated its weight to be between 300 and 400 pounds, an approximation considerably greater than the 250 pounds he proposed to Green, and a mass more accordant with its great height and robust build. As with Green, Taylor told Byrne that the creature held a 10-pound fish in its hand, with its fingers curled around the fish's body. However, in Byrne's retelling, the fish was held in the creature's left hand instead of its right. He believed that this creature must have fallen off the bank, Byrne wrote, or maybe jumped down and landed on all fours, because it seemed to rise awkwardly when it got to its feet. It walked upright all of the time that he watched it, and only once, when it was climbing the steep bank on the east side of the road, did he see it put a hand down. It seemed to do this to steady itself, as a man may do when climbing a steep slope. It did not run, but walked rapidly across the road, and kept its head turned towards Taylor, and its eyes locked on him, until it reached the bank. Taylor described the look as menacing, and although he was perfectly safe in the steel cab of a big solid truck with both doors securely locked, he said that he felt the hair on the back of his neck begin to prickle, and a cold feeling creep over him that was simply fear.